Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Progressively Yours Health and Wellness Podcast. I don't know why I was thinking there was going to be more music, but it's okay. We pulled through. This is going to be another wonderful episode. I'm really looking forward to sharing our guest, and welcome to all of the people who are joining us from Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Then before we go further, Bernard likes to open, we like to open with a spiritual, did I say your name or did I just say this is IMANI?
You can say neither.
Oh, okay. Well, he's Bernard and I'm IMANI. All of you know that, except for the really, really new people. But thank you again for joining us. And Bernard likes to open with a spiritual kind of balanced. That's what he does with his section on the spiritual opening.
Thank you, my love.
You're welcome.
I would like to invite those of you that would like to participate in our spiritual opening. It is part of our ritual and tradition for our show. If you are seated, I'd like to invite you to get comfortable where you are. To take in 3 breaths. After you hear the ting shaws, close your eyes and imagine what you want this show to be for you. Breathe in, breathe out. An ancestor, Thich Nhat Hanh, wrote these words from his text, The Art of Communicating. Relationships don't survive without right food. Many of us suffer because of difficult communication. We feel misunderstood, especially by those we love. In a relationship, we are nourishment for each other. So we have to select the kind of food we offer the other person, the kind of food that can help our relationships thrive. Everything, including love, hate, and suffering, needs food to continue. If suffering continues, it's because we keep feeding our suffering. Every time we speak without mindful awareness, we are feeding our suffering. With mindful awareness, we can look into the nature of our suffering and find out what kind of food we have been supplying to keep it alive. When we find the source of nourishment for our suffering, we can cut off that supply and our suffering will fade. It is indeed for the ancestors as we find the nourishment of love and compassion and grace to feed us through our communication first with ourselves and then with others. Ashe. Namaste. Amen.
Namaste. Amen. Thank you. Communication is so very important. And it is truly nourishing of the soul when we do it the right way. right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right, good. So, before we introduce our wonderful guest this evening, I want to read something. I'm on the board of an organization called Results Kids Club. It's here in Decatur, Georgia, and Maurice Gadsden is the CEO. He does a wonderful, marvelous job providing programs for the children in the community. And his biggest concern is how do we get kids there that don't have transportation? So he wrote this poem. I told him to stop writing poetry because he's not as good as me, but it's okay. I told him I'd read it anyway. Okay, so here we go from Maurice Gadsden. If we only had a van. It's great to have a facility where kids can learn and play. What about the ones not here because they don't have a way? My parents are at work. That we can understand. Leaving the kids home alone? Just think, if we only had a van. We could take them from video games once we get some transportation, and this could actually happen because of your generous donation. We will tutor the ones that need help, but all of them are going to exercise. And we'll feed them before they leave so we can see the sparkle in their eyes. Thank you all for what you do. This couldn't happen without you. Okay, so that was Maurice plugging the fact that we need a van for the Results Kids Club. You can, if you'd like to make a donation, you can either call him at 470-884-4534. That's 470-884-4534. Or you can make a payment to Zelle on to resultskidsclub@gmail.com. That's results with an S, kids with an S, club@gmail.com. And that's our commercial for the evening. Well, we also want you to make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Progressively Yours Health and Wellness Podcast. Subscribe and check the notice little bell for the notices, because if you do that every week, you will know when we're on live, and you'll get a note that I think you'll get a note beforehand a little bit. So our numbers are growing, and we're very excited about that. So please, please, please subscribe. And we thank all of you who are on Facebook and who are on LinkedIn also tuning in. Share the word. Thank you so much. We're grateful to all of you. And now I'm going to introduce our guest. Dr. Max T. Ragland has earned a doctorate of education and is a licensed clinical professional counselor, LCPC, in the state of Maryland, and the founder of Men Behind Bars outpatient counseling services. Surprisingly, while enrolled in the graduate program at Argosy, Dr. Ragland experienced a spiritually inspirational moment that brought him face to face with an overwhelming desire to author a book that would critically examine, probe, contradict, reveal, and bear witness to why men struggled with infidelity and adultery. Consequently, after completing his graduate program, Dr. Ragland continued to be moved by the area of writing a book that would address the age-old question, why do men cheat? After many years of professional and personal commitments, Dr. Ragland has completed his literary journey and is proud to introduce to the world Putting Your Dog to Sleep, Euthanizing the Cheating Desire in Men. Oh, I do have more. I know that's some title. So let's see. So Dr. Ragland believes that man is what he is by the fashioning of his very own hands. Man can choose to be a noble creature governed by obedience to truth and divine character, or man can give way to his lower self, governed by only a sense to satisfy his sexual appetite, without thought to his actions, and become no more than his four-legged friend. I know. There's a lot. There's a lot to unpack in there, Dr. Ragland. Come on up and let's start the discussion.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
Hello,
Hello, hello.
Bernard.
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
No, no. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Imani and Brother Bernard. I mean, it truly is. Just want to say I'm very grateful that you would allow me this opportunity to be a part of your podcast. Also, I'd like to thank Toya for all the work she did behind the scenes, making sure that I had everything that I need in order to be able to log in correctly. You know, us some of us old people, man, we get kind of nervous around this technology, man. But Toya, she was very helpful. So I'm very blessed for that, and I'm very grateful to be here.
All right.
Well, thank you, and and you're welcome. You are honored to have you. And so, as we continue, we begin. I'd like to ask you to, since the audience do not know you, um, tell us a little bit about who you are when you think about your life from birth to age 12. What is the first story that comes to mind that you're open to sharing during that time period?
Well, for those that don't know, my name is Max Ragland. I was born in Anniston, Alabama. Just actually a 90-minute drive. I guess it would be west of Atlanta. And I come from a two-parent home. My mother name is, who's deceased now, Viola Ragland. My father name is Howard Ragland. My mother was born in 1920 in Talladega, Alabama. My father was born in 1919 Talladega, Alabama. I'm the youngest of 7 children. And I come from a two-parent home, a very loving home. We were rich in terms of just the love that we had in the home. I've always had food, shelter, and clothing. From a modest means, and most of I would say the young men and women in my community also came from a two-parent home. So, from age 1 through 12, it was a great experience. I've had. It's interesting you said age through 12 because it kind of I can remember the first time that I stole something, and I think I was maybe around I'm gonna say 7 or 8 at the time. I can remember taking the neighbor next door, Miss Penson. They had like I guess it would be like a store in their home, and I can remember going in my sister's purse or pocketbook at the time and taking a dime out, going and get some candy. And I bring that up because as I got older and we began to just going through what my life journey, I asked myself one important question: has there ever been a time in my life where I didn't know that I was doing wrong? And I can't think of one time, even as a young person, 12, 7, and 8, where I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. I didn't understand it obviously to the degree that I understand it now as an adult man, as an elder man. But even at young as 7 years old, I knew that it was wrong for me to take money out of my sister's pocketbook. And I think I attribute that one to my parents, my mother in particular, because I was raised up in the church, baptized at age 7, but also now being older, I realize that there's a spiritual side of us that we have that connects us with the divine, and so I've always known that whenever I did wrong, and from that, whenever I did wrong, it seemed as if that I suffered more than my friends did. Shooting hooking from school and everything seemed like the punishment was all pretty much more severe. So definitely, my first 12 years of my life was very loving, very kind. But even at a young age, I had some influence, and I can talk about that, later as we get into the conversation.
Very good, very good. Thank you for sharing that. One of our viewers wrote, the title is Fire. Great book. I have is that
I
that
have a
is
copy. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
most sale for 2024.
Well, that's William.
Yes, William. Yeah, thank you. Shout out to William, your brother. Again, he's been very instrumental from the book design, the interior design, the exterior design. Helped built the web page. So I definitely recommend someone interested in the book design web page. Reach out to WM Graphics. Does excellent work. With reasonable price and literally I would not be here in terms of the book in itself and make sure it was available to everyone if it wasn't for the help that William has provided. So I'm very grateful for him for that.
Well, speaking of the book, I found it a very interesting metaphor in the title of your book. How did this title discover you, especially the term dog?
Well, the title chose me, and as I share with maybe a few people, definitely I talked to with Will about it. In 2006, when I was enrolled in the doctorate program, Arts University in Arlington, Virginia, I can remember sitting around talking to my fellow classmates, and we just having conversations about relationships. And out of that conversation, I want to say it was just it hit me like, okay, putting your dog to sleep. And it's interesting because it literally happened in that way. But when I think about it in depth, as I talked about in my book, why this book is needed, I can remember my mother, and we had a very loving relationship, and we had some challenges, but I can remember her sharing with me, hearing her say the words, "Men are like dogs," and so I want to say that seed was planted early on in my life, and at, I would say, the right time, it came to fruition and said, okay, well, hey, this is something you may want to look into. And I say that, for me, it was God inspired. And I was nowhere near ready, even though the title "Putting Your Dog to Sleep," I had a lot of work to do on myself. The dog in me was very much alive, and I had not put the dog to sleep in myself, but definitely I would say the title was, it was God inspired.
So you write from a very personal perspective,
Yes.
and I know one of the things that I thought you did was kind of generalize about men, but I really felt like you were sharing your personal experience as well as some discussions you've had with folks about this particular topic. Why did you choose to? I mean, because in the early part of the book, you have letters of apology to
Right.
to former wives and your children, right? So why did you choose to self-disclose like that? That's a very bold approach, by the way, and I applaud you for doing that.
It was, I didn't realize the damage I had done until later on, meaning that, as we say in the beginning of the book, there's an apology to Sandy, who's my first wife. We have two older children. We met, matter of fact, we met the night she graduated from high school in 1976. Had two children, and she to this day is a very very loving woman, very kind woman, very spiritual woman. And for me, I was just the opposite. I mean, I was loving and a kind person, but I had a lot of character flaws, meaning that I was caught up in the streets. By the time she met me, I was 18. I had used drugs and used heroin, smoked marijuana, had a felony arrest record, had been shot twice, but that was something that was pure about her, and that she brought out a side in me for the first time in my life that I had not experienced before. That was the first time that I would say, as a teenager, that I could say that I was in love. Coming up as a young kid and having girlfriends in high school, but I can say that was the first adult relationship with all of my flaws that I had, and I didn't do right by her. I lied to her. Back then in the 70s, it was reefer. I'm dating myself. Marijuana.
I remember that term.
Yeah, marijuana. It was in some ways always been accepted in the community. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing. So I would lie to her saying that I wasn't working. I would have money. She would ask me where I was getting the money from. I would tell her I was selling reefer. I was selling marijuana. But in all actuality, I was robbing stores. I robbed the store when I was 17. I was shot twice. The first robbery that I committed. I was shot twice in a robbery, and it was a neighborhood store. I knew the elderly people in the community, but I was just in a sick place. I was, I wasn't raised like that, but I was, the issue that I struggled with, I was crying out. And that's why now when I go into the prison talking to young men, I understand is that many times we're acting out of some type of pain, whether it's child molestation, whether it was abusive parents, whether it was neglect, but we're acting out. And for me, I was acting out in a way that, and I talked about the relationship with my mom, which that will come later on, a loving mother. But what I didn't realize that at the time is that my mother had to deal with infidelity of my father, and a lot of that pain came out on me. I was the youngest one that's still at home, and I didn't understand why I felt I was being treated in this way. And as a result, we had a rocky relationship. We didn't talk for a lot of time. We lived in the same house, but really didn't come over. When I wouldn't communicate with her, she was always loving toward me, but I wouldn't communicate with her. But I acted out in the streets, and it's a long story short. I went to prison at 1983. It was, we were 12 years in prison. Left saying with with a daughter, and my oldest daughter, and my youngest son was 5 and 4, and she had to raise our kids by herself. She raised the children by herself. She was a great mom. I was very blessed to have met her and to have had kids by someone who really valued, motherhood, parenthood. My mother was living at the time, her mother was living at the time, but I saw the damage I did to my children. Today we're kind of putting our relationship back together, and I just felt the need that I wanted her to know that I was sorry. I've told her many times, that I was sorry, but I wanted it just feel like I can't do enough to let her know that I understand now in a way that I didn't understand back then. So, and when I came home from prison, I thought I wanted to, we got married, and I heard her again. I got out of prison in 1990, November 21st, 1994. We got married in January 1995 after being gone for 12. And I wasn't ready for marriage. I grew up in prison, and by June, I cheated on her. And I didn't give thought to what I was doing. I felt I went to prison. It's all about me now. And I heard her twice, and I have to live with that. But that is one thing that I deeply regret, and so that's why I want to apologize to her. The way that I did.
To continue to share, shifting, and speak to the audience and us about the book. What's the primary thesis and the premise? As it somehow seems clear that your story influenced what you are writing, share with us about the premise and the thesis of the text.
Well, I would say definitely say, the premise of the book is I opened in the beginning is, why is this book needed? And there are many reasons why the book, one is needed because I think, I know there are children who are suffering as a result of their father making the decisions that he has made by maybe cheating on the mother. There are women who are blaming themselves and thinking somehow they did something wrong why their husband cheated on them. I look a certain way, dress a certain way. I have to cook a certain way, and there's also the individual man himself who is struggling with overcoming, say, his weaknesses in not being vulnerable enough or mature enough to face acknowledging that he doesn't have a relationship with I'm saying a higher power in the way that he should. So the premise of the book really was, it was a healing for me, but also hoping it would be a guide, it would be a help for those, the children, women, and men themselves, in saying that, how do we begin to look at that? But I think the issue is deeper, even though sex is an outcome of it. I think it goes much more deeper than just a man wanting to have sex. I think that, as I talk about in the book, that as men, we have been so, I look at my own life and I think about being in not elementary school, but I would say maybe the early part of during that time, I guess, be junior high school.
Yeah.
And having just talking to multiple girls, considering them my girlfriend, but ask myself, where did that come from? Why is it that, I would have a girlfriend and I would talk to her and in one period, and then the next period I'm talking to another girl. And I began to realize is that as men, we have been socialized in a way to where how we view women. And I think for me, in that socialization at a very young age, I even see it today, that particularly looking back in my own life, is that where, whether it came through conversation may have been shared, just being out in the streets, but in a lot of conversation I had definitely came from that. But also, was it something that already had been built into my subconsciousness that I began to act out on this? And how did I value women? Because I have 3 older sisters. I have, 3 daughters at the time of, my daughters. So I came from a family of women who very intelligent, powerful, women who have a voice. And I wasn't raised like that, but nevertheless, there was something in me that where I saw myself as I didn't see girls, if you will, at that particular time, and see what I saw myself, not knowing what was taking place. And I realize now is that I valued myself more than I valued the girls that was in my life, by the way, through my behavior.
Now you go back in history, and you quote scripture from the Bible, from the Quran, about how it's kind of like innate in men to be cheaters. And you say that the different religions kind of reinforced the kind of second class citizenship of women throughout cultures and races, and over time. Talk a little bit about that, because part of that could be a cop out. Could be, oh well, you talk about boys, could be boys. The whole you talk about Trump and his whatever, but talk a little bit about that, because we definitely want to get to the personal responsibility part of it.
Right.
And I mean, we know. I mean, you don't. I know you spend time in the book, kind of documenting the sexism, that has gone on for generations. But I mean, we all know that, and so talk a little bit about the personal responsibility and how to avoid, because not all men are cheaters. Clearly, that's not everybody. Many times in there, you say men, and it sounds like in general all men. I don't think you mean it like that. But talk a little bit about personal responsibility and how men can avoid the traps, if you will.
Well, definitely, I use the Bible reference because I talked about is that for me, I want to look at historically, going back, the beginning, if you will. And for me, I believe that the Bible was written by men. And when I look at the passage in the Bible, it says that God, and I'm paraphrasing, caused man to go into a deep sleep and took a rib from man. I think that was a very powerful passage to have to examine, because what it says, what it suggested was that when you look at creation, when I look at creation and I look at how each creature in creation had an independent creation, if you will, and woman is the only creature that I was able to pull from those teachings, that where her creation was different. Man was fashioned from the earth; he was fashioned from the dust. God breathed of his spirit into man, whereas woman was taken from the rib of man and was fashioned. And this is why it's called woman. But and the challenge is for me was that it doesn't speak to, there's a contradiction in it, where when everything else in creation had an evolution, if you will, an evolution process that took place in a way that where their creation was independent. So I saw that in the very beginning as being a sexist, if you will, a patriarchal type approach to women's creation, a second class citizen, if you will. And now, you take that and multiply that by thousands of years of being ingrained in other passages as well. It's saying that woman, she was made to be for man, and that become ingrained in our culture, whether whether in Christianity. I'm Muslim. My faith. I'm raised as a Christian, but I'm Muslim. But even in Muslim, I began to look at some of the writings and saying and trying to identify what I believe, what is of God and what is of man, and personal accountability. That and what I don't, what I'm hoping that from reading the book is that I wanted to highlight that point, but at the same time, man needs to be held accountable for his action. I mean, that's why I go back and say there was never a time since I was 7 years old where I did not realize that I was doing something wrong. And so, even though I believe man has been socialized to see women a certain way, but also man can't get away from the fact that within him innately that God is in him, is present in him. Now we may suppress that, we may not acknowledge that, but right and wrong still exists within him. And in his mind is how he valuing women, even though he's rationalizing and saying that because he's a man, if you will, then I can commit these kinds of acts. No, I can commit this. I don't love her. With all rationalization, because if you take that same man and ask him, would you want your wife to do that with you? He would say no. He would say no. So it suggests to me then there's a morality that exists within him. So it just unfortunately that there are a lot of men try to rationalize the behavior by saying, well, I really don't love the woman. I love my wife. I take care of my family. But I think, that's for me, that's a spiritual disconnect. And spiritual disconnect is that in the physical sense is that as long as I operate from a physical plane, then I'm not going to see the wrong in what I'm doing, because in the act itself, in the physical act, it feels good. With somebody else, it feels good. But in the spiritual sense is when I understand that I begin to understand that my behavior is creating harm, is creating a disconnect between me and my family, is creating harm between me and my children. So only when man began to elevate himself in the spiritual sense, where he truly began to understand that what he's doing that has consequences. So definitely, I want to make sure that the readers what I'm conveying is that man definitely needs to be held accountable, for his behavior, and it's not. But I think it's we have to. I guess as a scientist, I was always important for me, like, is the why question. Why are we behaving a certain way? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's understanding that the root of, and even with the root in itself, as I talked about, being written by man from the very beginning provided a way for him to be able to be to act in a certain way and try to justify that with his behavior.
Okay, so I want to flip this 180. I mentioned to a number of male friends about the title of your book. They said, well, what about women? Women cheat too. Or one friend today actually said, it's the woman's fault, because women, it's all the women's fault. And I said, okay, that's one perspective. But in your book, you say that statistics say that 15% of women cheat and 25% of men cheat. So it does happen. The numbers may be even higher than that, but
right.
One of my first books in graduate school was How to Lie with Statistics. So whatever whoever wrote that, they were looking at both and understanding that women are just as guilty as men nowadays. Maybe, and you do say it's for different reasons. Talk a little bit about that, because I read that and I'm like, maybe.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Dr. Imani, because that question, not only from you, I anticipated from men. And I think many times, not all the time, but I would say generally speaking, when someone, and when a man says, okay, well, women cheat. So what that suggests to me then, what is it that is causing what I would call a dis-ease within yourself? Because I believe, and I'm going to address your question is that yes, women do cheat. That's the statistic bear witness to that. What we actually seen in the courts and all of the documentation that bear witness to that. But I believe we have to, at some point, we have to get to a place where we have to be able to have a conversation to where specifically about, in this particular case, is about men. Now, we can have a conversation about women because women do cheat as well. But I think what that does, it creates I think it's a great conversation to have. I think you can have a conversation where it's about men and women cheating. I think the last statistics I saw where it says that I think it's like 50 to 53% of men have acknowledged cheating. I think it's around like 40-something% of women acknowledge cheating. And those are the ones who answered the survey. So clearly, women, but again, what I'm interested in is that what is happening within our society to where women have made the decision they want to cheat, and where men have made the decision they want to cheat. And that's why I tell the man, well, look, brother, we can talk about women cheating, but that's not going to help your situation. Because at the end of the day, we all have to be held accountable for our own actions. Now, we can have a general conversation, so we can talk about the where if we look at the women today, and I use an example, my mother who was born in 1920, she had 7 children. My grandmother who had 14 kids. Now, you ask yourself, did my grandmother, did she want to cheat? Did my mother want to cheat? Or what? So women desire for intimacy, for love, that's been the same since the very beginning. But socially, the circumstances are different. So whereas my grandmother, who had 14 kids, who primarily was dependent on my grandfather, Mr. Hodges Pearson, is that even if she had a desire to cheat, having 14 kids stopped her from wanting to cheat because she was dependent on his income. Whereas also she had 14 children because during that particular time, I can remember my mother talking about homemade birth control, what they use. Contraceptives today really has only been around in the way that it has within the last maybe 60 years. So my grandmother didn't have the type of contraceptives that my daughter have today. So even if she wanted to leave, being dependent on my grandfather, she was, and then also the family, the value system was different. So the family, in my grandmother's time, it was important to keep the family together. Even if grandfather was cheating, she wanted to keep the family together. If you fast forward today, to where during that particular time, if a woman got divorced, it was seen as sin or shame. In today's time, if a woman stay in a marriage she shouldn't be in, it now is seen as being she should be shamed for that. Why are you with him? Why are you staying with him? You can find somebody else. So the value has changed in some sense if you compare the two, say, different generations. Mm-hmm. So I would say regarding the women, I know women are independent. Earning their own income. So you look at 3 areas to where you have the labor market where women now is able to earn their own income. You have contraceptives that allows women to now to where I don't have to worry about becoming pregnant because I have contraceptive. And then you have women equality. So I think you look at those 3 social components that has contributed, if you will, to women having being able to commit infidelity. But as relates to men, but I tell men all of that may be well true. But at the end of the day, we have a responsibility as men, because I believe we nurture the environment as men, meaning that we make sure that the environment has everything it needs for the man, the wife, the children, and the family to be able to grow, evolve in a healthy environment. And when go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I want to jump in. A few things I want to respond to. I want to go back because I think as we're having this conversation, I think it is deeper than the metaphor of cheating. Mm-hmm. So with the church piece, the creation story that you quoted is creation story 2, which is in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 2. And that particular story was adopted, as you know, and I'm just saying this for the audience, primarily by the institution of church many years ago. Early on, for the use of the socialization of society. So church was really big, but creation story too was the one that set up male domination over women.
Correct.
And that continued to be the main creation story when there are, I think, 5 creation stories just in the Old Testament alone. You got the creation story 1 in Genesis 1, where men and women are created equally, mutually. The text says, "Let us create them in our image. Let us create male and female in our image." So there's a balance between the sexes when those who wrote creation story 1. My favorite creation story is Proverbs 8, which was written in the voice of a woman who talks about that God in the creation of the universe, of the world, took delight in the creation of God's world, which included all of us. So those creation stories don't get much light as a part of our socialization. So when you have one that shows an up and down, okay, so this is how women, then it shows that domination period of domination theme that has been operative throughout the years. The other part I wanted to respond to that you and Imani was discussing in terms of how do we move our men and women to another level of relating, I think it has to do with the beginning of how do we help heal the inner boy and the inner girl from the pain and suffering, which turns out in behavior later to find some sense of relief and release from the internal suffering and pain that has been experienced, principally in the first 5 to 12 years of life, which is why my favorite question is, tell us a story about the first 12 years of life. So we make use of neuroscience now, for instance. We know that the brain is the primary organ that is communicating the needs of the body. So what is happening? In our internal suffering and pain, there's this longing that the brain produces dopamines and oxytocin. And so it's the oxytocin, I think I'm saying right. Oxytocin is one, the natural one that gives us the great feeling, which we are after, which is natural and excitement when we are happy, when we experience love and attention and affection. Dopamines are the ones that we create falsely. All of these fuel our behavior that's rooted, I think, in the internal suffering and pain of the inner boy and the inner girl who are longing for some release that has taken place. And for us, as if we stick with, we talk about human in general, if we talk about our community, we have to go all the way back to enslavement and the brutality of how we were treated. And when I went to Ghana and went through those dungeons and then heard some of the stories of how the church from Europe, Portuguese, the Brits, how they brutalized both men and women sexually. Then we got this genetic predisposition that follows us that also fuels our interactions and our behaviors. So the point I'm making in light of the conversation is we have a lot of deep internal suffering. A lot of it is genetic that has passed down from hundreds of generations
DNA
that we're working through, and we need places and spaces whereby we can be of help to brothers like you're doing with your group to help men and women heal. I see it every day in my practice. I have like 4 women's group, 2 men's group, and these themes, the cheating element doesn't come up, but there's this hunger for healing the suffering pain that stimulates in these first years of life, early years of life.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, just responding to what you're saying, brother. But no, I mean, you have. I mean, one of the things that Amos Wilson, who's a I want to say a psychologist, he said that when we talk about African people, African American people, is that we always have to approach it in a historical context, and historically, that if we begin to look at our Ma'afa, or we begin to look at our Holocaust, if you will, in the United States, what took place on the continent, and from the continent through the Middle Pass up until we landed on the shores of North America. I mean, you really can't describe that in words in terms of the trauma that we have experienced. No. And I mean, there's no words for it. There's some things that take place you can't define it with words. And I believe that what happened to us as a people, that there's literally no words for that to describe what we've gone through, and the depths of how it has impacted us as a people. But with that, and coming to North America and having our culture, if you will, stripped from us and being institutionalized in a culture that is foreign to us and taken on ways, because if we look at some of our traditions, our cultural traditions, that there was a rite of passage that we went through as young boys and as women. There was how the elders were treated, in our in the village, if you will. How everybody was family, how everything was connected. The cosmology of everything was connected. The children, the mothers, the fathers, the land, the trees. So there was no separation of any of that. It all came from one source, and it was and all that existed was within us. But then unfortunately became enslaved, and then those cultural traditions and unfortunate barbaric practices began to change, if you will, in terms of how we relate to one another. Yeah. But so when we fast, but I go back and it wasn't. I used my grandmother or my mother as a reference point, and contrasted with, I would say, today, 2024. And even though my mother and father obviously were exposed to racism, institutional racism, systemic racism long before I became into being, but I also look at that, how the community, how they state the marriage, the predominant, that they were the family structure. And so we have to take in also the social context in which our children, they're growing up in today as well. Even though our grandparents and parents, they dealt with that trauma, everything from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the institutional racism practice. But when you hear about cities like Black Wall Street, when you hear about Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, when you hear about 15th Street in Anniston, Alabama, when you hear about A.T. Gaston, where even though with that existing, you had a family unit that was in place, and the three things that I believe that were intact was the church, was the school system, and you had the church, school system, and the family. So, so the values that was taught in the home was reinforced in the school. Go ahead, Dr. Martin.
No, we actually are out of time, and this is such a wonderful discussion, and I think your book is a good way for people to have this discussion, because as you said, and Bernard said, and I said, it's so much deeper than cheating, and so this gives you a platform to introduce a number of different topics about what's going on specifically in our community, but throughout the world, in terms of relationships and what's happening.
And to Imani's point, in what you wrote in the book, that part that I was reading, Asa Hilliard, as you talked about early on all of his trips back and forth to Africa, came back to bring the point that we do need the socialization transformation in our community.
Right.
which is very, very difficult, and is the
But
challenge going
necessary,
ahead,
right?
and
Absolutely.
necessary. So,
So,
Dr. Ragland, give us give the audience a 1 minute spiel, and then we need to shift for a closing that you might not need to do.
Well, I would just say to the listeners again, thank you, Dr. Imani. Thank you, Brother Bernard, for allowing me to come on the show. As we said earlier, is that when we begin to look at cheating, is that cheating is a learned behavior. There's nothing that the Creator has put in us to dictate that we should cheat. Sex is a natural urge that we all have, that we all share. It is a very beautiful way of life. It is a spiritual expression that the Creator has blessed us with. But unfortunately, for men and women, but particularly is stretching around men, is that we have to begin to look at ourselves and reconnect with our spiritual self, because we have to have a relationship with God that is greater than our Lord desires. So I believe that once a man begin to understand, rebuild his relationship with God, then that would be his beginning journey to really being able to put his dog to sleep. So
All right.
thank you so much. We're grateful for you coming on and blessing us with your book and your information. And hold on, we're going to have you in the background for a little bit as we finish out the show, and then we're going to talk with you.
Okay, I'll be right here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
You're welcome. Very inspiring conversation. Could go
no, it's like we would just. I mean, we may have to make this show a 2-hour show.
We might have to do
by the time we get to near the end of the first hour, we're just warming up.
Yeah,
and our questions and the responses and all that lead to more. Just more and more and more. So go out and buy his book. I think it's a great way to have a discussion about some really important issues, more than just the cheating piece. And so you wanted to share something?
Yeah, as we come to the end, what I wanted to share when I was thinking about the show tonight is there's some foundational and basic developmental needs that we all have, and that we will all have to contend with and continue to develop until we die. These basic needs we do not outgrow, because they are in us genetically and emotionally. They begin from the moment we are born. And there are 5 basic needs that each one of us stand always in need of taking care of, having a place, nurturance, support, protection, and loving limits. So briefly, place simply means place of belonging. When your infant is born, right? If we're fortunate to have both parents or one parent with a loving family, we want that infant to come into the home even before they're born, feeling that they have a place where they belong. If they have a place where they belong and are welcome, and they were anticipated in coming, and the ideal family had everything that they need and planned, the infant's brain begins to feed on that and feel that they have a sense of belonging. The second is nurturance. Early on, the nurturance is an emotional nurturance of giving the infant, especially infant. The first 18 months are critical in this part of development, where they're being fed, held, cuddled with love, and the energy is felt between child and parent. It could be mother is first, and then father, others caretakers, but they feel the sense of nurture. We need nurturance throughout our life. We need to feel that we have a place where we belong. One of the trauma experience from our enslavement and being enslaved from West Africa to here in the Americas, in our genetic predisposition, is we didn't know where we belong. I had a client who was telling me the other day, he just returned from Cuba, and he was so amazed at how the Cubans who looked like us, knew exactly where they were from on the continent of Africa, that they could name without hesitation where they were from. Third is support. So part of our development is always needing a sense of support, feeling supported. It's like when you're holding an infant, you're making sure that the head is held properly. The back is supported. Mm-hmm. Fourth is protection. We need to feel protected, always protected. Mm-hmm. That I can play, I can nurture, I can have fun, and know that people have my back. Mm-hmm. And last, loving limits. Loving limits is an interesting one, because let's say a child has a temper tantrum. What do they need most? When they're feeling all of those powerful emotions, they need to know that they can be held and be assured that I'm here. These emotions are not going to overtake you. I'm going to take care of you, and it's all right to feel this energy. It's called loving limits. And so these are the 5 genetic developmental needs that we all have. They start from the time we're born, and they don't stop needing being taken care of, nurtured, reinforced until we die. And so that's all I want to say about it, because it can go much further, but I know we, in light of time.
And connecting with our discussion this evening, it sounds like when some of those needs are not met, that's when people start exhibiting behavior that's not necessarily for their own good or for the good of people around them. So, I mean, it's just,
well, to that point behavior. is that the behavior is a symptom of what's going on internally, deep seated. And so it's the brain at work trying to get what it needs so that the body can function at its best. And so sometimes when there's an acting out, it may not be the moral or the right thing to do, but the brain is in charge, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, the brain is in charge. We have the capacity to engage in critical thinking, but the brain is going to get what it needs by any means necessary. And that's just neuroscience is proving that every day.
And Mr. Williams said, this was an amazing discussion, and we need a part 2, because as we said, there's so many things that this brought up for us. So we thank Dr. Ragland again for his book and for joining us. And we thank our audience for listening in, watching, and thank you so much for your support. Go ahead to subscribe to our YouTube channel, please. Progressively Yours Health and Wellness Podcast. And that's it for this evening. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you again next.
Well, to give an announcement of the next session, next month, February, will be Relationship Development Month. So the first Tuesday, we will have a child play therapist who will begin. The second week, a colleague, Michael Cook, will talk about family systems. Third week, Dr. Eugene Robinson will talk about care for the elderly. And the last week, Dr. Shea will talk about intimate relationships. So we're feeding off of what we're talking about tonight.
This is actually a good discussion.
But we're gonna take it to a different level.
Thank you. All right. You're welcome. Thank you. And we'll see you all next week. Have a wonderful week between now and then, and stay positive.
Ashe.
Ashe.
And namaste.